the Thursday edition live on Bloomberg TV and radio. Really fascinating as we watch CVS shares today. Not so hot, down $2, about 2%, but it's been, as David just pointed out, a pretty good year, up about 28% year to date, up 54% year over year. With our eyes on Wall Street, we have a lot to cover this hour and want to bring you the latest on the U.S. and Iran, with a second day of strikes breaking out. Tyler Kendall standing by on the north lawn of the White House, as well as our political panel. First, let's update Wall Street with CVS in mind. We bring in Charlie Pellet. He's at World Headquarters in New York with the latest on the markets. Charlie, what do you have?
All right, now we've got two themes going on, chips and oil. We begin with what's going on with chips, specifically the SOX. It is surging now by 4.8%. That, of course, the Philadelphia Stock Exchange Semiconductor Index. We are seeing a tech rally today. Right now, we have got NASDAQ up by 1.2%, but where all the big techs are located, the NASDAQ 100 Index up now by 1.7%, and the SOX up by 4.8%. To give you some context, the S&P by comparison up 0.8%. Dow Industrials up 157 now, up by about 0.3%. The VIX now below 16, a 10-year at 4.53%, with a 2-year currently yielding 4.15%. Spot gold up $49 the ounce, up 1.2%, 41.26. I mentioned crude. It is lower now by 2.2%. A pullback for West Texas Intermediate back below 72 a barrel, 71.89. Brent just above 76 now, down by 2.5%. Former Fed Chair Ben Bernanke has been appointed to Anthropic's long-term benefit trust. That's an oversight body meant to keep the AI company accountable to its public mission. And the jersey that New York Knicks star Jalen Brunson wore in Game 1 of the NBA Finals was sold for a little more than $1 million in a Sotheby's auction. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcast. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's Joe Mathieu. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, great, Charlie. Thank you so much. He'll be back in about 20 minutes' time with another check on Wall Street. Our eyes specifically on oil today, and curious to see prices pulling back to the extent that they are, with more than 2% declines for WTI and Brent, considering nothing really has changed other than less traffic, and obviously that means less oil getting through the Strait of Hormuz. This follows a second straight day of attacks, and in both directions. The United States, according to U.S. Central Command, says it completed another round of strikes involving 90 targets, air defense systems, coastal surveillance assets, missile and drone storage sites. And Central Command pointing to the possibility of more, saying U.S. forces remain vigilant, lethal, and prepared to execute operations directed by the commander-in-chief. In the other direction from Iran, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps saying it struck U.S. bases in Kuwait and Bahrain and is threatening to expand such attacks. Whatever Iran throws at the U.S. or its allies, however, the president telling the press corps on Air Force One on his way back from the NATO summit that the United States will send much more in response. Listen.
We just hit them very hard, and I say we hit them 20 to 1. Every time they hit us, we're going to hit them 20. They did a little something today, but it was really retribution for last night. They hit actually 3 boats, not 2. And when they hit, we hit back much harder.
Every time they hit us, we're going to hit them 20, the commander-in-chief says. Still today, some 24 hours after the president said the ceasefire was over, it is still unclear what the status of the MOU is with Iran, what the status of the Strait is exactly, other than Bloomberg reporting that very few ships are getting through at this point, as very few are willing to try. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, our Washington correspondent, is at the White House now with more. Has there been any other official language coming from the White House on this, Tyler?
Well, Joe, at this point, we haven't heard from the president quite yet today. He does have a few events on his schedule. As of now, they all remain closed to the press, though no doubt we'll be seeing if they perhaps could open up later this afternoon, or if he gives us an update on his Truth Social, because at this point the president was asked just yesterday whether or not this flare-up in fighting means that the ceasefire is totally over. As you know, he said he thinks it's over. He was asked if this means that we will see a full resumption of hostilities, and he said, quote, "I don't know," which is leaving open the door that perhaps negotiations could resume in some regard. He himself said that he wouldn't prevent his negotiators from moving forward, though he said that he ultimately doesn't think that it could prove to be fruitful. We know that the diplomatic efforts had been stalled during this week while the funeral for the former supreme leader was held in Iran and set to schedule to end today. So we'll see if maybe there's some sort of engagement. We are getting these headlines that Iran is talking to some regional partners, including earlier today, Qatar, as well as breaking across the terminal moments ago, a call seemed to be held with Saudi Arabia. But Joe, the thing that really needs to be sorted out here is the Strait, because as you're talking about, we're seeing very little flows through. But important to point out, if flows are going through, the imagery is showing us that they are not going anywhere near that corridor that the U.S. coordinated that is closer to Oman. Any flows are going closer to Iran. And we should also point out, Joe, that it appears evident that a lot of ships are turning off their radars, their transponders, so that they can't be detected. And that may also influence just how much we know is actually getting through that waterway.
Really interesting. As we look at a national average, $3.84 for a gallon of regular gas, according to AAA. Tyler, following the surge that we saw in crude oil prices yesterday, albeit they are down about 2% today, is the White House still talking about taking any other actions, including suspending the federal gas tax? That seemed to peter out pretty quickly.
We used to talk about that so much, nearly every day a few weeks ago, Joe, but at this point we haven't really heard that much messaging around this. President Trump seems to be solely focused on what's going to happen next in terms of the kinetic action when it comes to the conflict in Iran. We can say that perhaps the most high-profile fallout so far since these tensions have escalated is Bloomberg News' new reporting this morning, for people familiar, that Qatar is pausing efforts to rapidly revive production at the world's largest LNG facility. That is going to be something that we should watch really closely here, because our analysts at Bloomberg Economics just put out a new report. They crunched the numbers. We had seen flows surge to 16 million barrels per day, but the last 7-day average has been cut in half to 8 million barrels per day, and that certainly is going to ring some alarm bells here at the White House.
Yeah, there was some heavy damage to that country's LNG infrastructure in the outset of this war. Tyler, at the time, said it could be 2 or 3 years before they're back to the pre-war flows. Tyler Kendall on the North Lawn of the White House, we thank you as ever, Bloomberg Washington correspondent. As we wait to hear from the president today, and he could still open some of the events that he has on his schedule billed so far simply as signing time and executive time, which we frequently see on the presidential guidance. We're also covering breaking news and a vacuum that has been left in the Senate race in Maine. Listen.
I have faced some very serious allegations, and I just want to make it clear. This is all false. We did it the way that we were told we are supposed to make change, and we won. And now they are not going to let us have it. Not if it's me. And so we're suspending campaign operations.
An emotional Graham Platner in an 11-minute free-form handheld vertical video seemingly recorded on his telephone, raging against the party machine and making the announcement that many, if not most, Democrats in Maine were hoping for, suspending his race for U.S. Senate. This, of course, is not the end of the story. As we've heard repeatedly from organizers in the Democratic Party, the Platner campaign was trying somehow to affect the outcome of, well, what happens next and who might replace him in carrying the Democratic torch in an effort to unseat Republican Senator Susan Collins of Maine, frequently targeted by Democrats, never toppled. And there are questions this evening about how exactly this is going to go forward. The party is now talking about a nominating convention with only weeks to go. And we wonder if that will be enough for voters to feel like they had a say in this and to have a credible campaign move forward in such a short period of time. A lot easier said than done, as we now play to our political panel for their take on this. Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis join us now. I'm glad to say Jeanne is here, democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center, and our friend Rick Davis, partner at Stonecourt Capital, our Republican strategist. Now what, Jeanne? How do you pull off a convention with 600 delegates with 2 weeks?
Yeah, and can I just say, Joe, he needed to say five words. I'm suspending my campaign. Instead, we were treated to this crying game, narcissistic, blaming the media, blaming everybody, never taking responsibility for the very credible allegations against him of breaking and entering and rape, along with the many other things, including Nazi tattoos. That was a video for the ages, I have to say, and one we really didn't need. And, I would just give credit to the Maine Democratic Party, the executive director there, Devin Murphy Anderson. She has done a brilliant job pushing back, particularly on something that you mentioned, which is the reason apparently this video took so long to come out, because this guy and his campaign wanted a role in his replacement. Now, can you just imagine if somebody like Eric Swalwell said, I'll step down from the governor's race in California, but I'd like to decide who's going to fill in. It is narcissistic. And, the Maine Democrats do have a process in place. It's a short time period, but boy, good riddance. And there's a big, rich Democratic bench there that can certainly fill and excel in these shoes.
Well, the crying game had a surprise ending, as I remember here, Jeannie, and this can too. If anybody could pull this off, I figure it's Rick Davis. What do you have, 2 weeks? So it's July 27. You need to hold a nominating convention this month, Rick. 600 delegates to pick the nominee. Go. How do you do it?
Actually, getting a hall and filling it with people who are already leaders of the Democratic Party of Maine isn't the hard part. And even picking a candidate, that's just a couple of ballots. Boom, you got a candidate. The hard part starts then, which is getting the entire Democratic Party to embrace that individual, to get the money wrapped around that individual in order to wage a campaign that's going to be the most expensive campaign in the midterm elections. I mean, they're talking about a potential ad buy totaling $400 million. And if the candidate is incredible, the money doesn't show up, and really it doesn't matter whether or not you'd had a convention or not. So the trick here really starts post-convention, and it almost doesn't matter who they pick. I mean, the parties are going to have to coalesce around this individual, regardless of their barnacles or their abilities, and and make this a competitive race. Because as we heard from Jim Messina earlier today on this show, he's run every kind of rationale around this, how do Democrats win the Senate, and the one thing he keeps getting back to is all roads lead through Maine. So this is the kind of thing where if the Democrats are prepared to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on a brand new candidate with limited statewide experience and probably a record of losing, that's what's going to make this critical for them.
Boy, really something. And yes to all of this. Jeannie, we heard from Emily's List. The pro-choice women's PAC responded to that video post that Graham Platner put on Twitter. 11 minutes, it says, and zero accountability. With that said, what do we need to hear from the Elizabeth Warrens and the Ro Khannas and the Bernie Sanders, who were okay with the Nazi tattoo, they were okay with the sexting and the philandering, whatever else all these other accusations were, but found a line here? Because a lot of this, as I think you have stated, could have been prevented.
It absolutely could have. And Emily's List, I couldn't agree more. They are absolutely right. Zero accountability there. And I do think you have Democrats with eggs on their face. And I would say it starts with the DSCC. It starts, unfortunately, with the Democratic National Party with Chuck Schumer. Part of what we have to do is go back when Platner was first plucked out of obscurity, and he was plucked by DC and New York City progressive consultants. He didn't grow up organically out of the Maine woods. He was plucked. And what they did is they wanted Janet Mills to run. She was uncertain. She was hemming and hawing. And they pushed out other really viable candidates, which is why we saw so many candidates get in on the governor's race there. And so they do have egg on their face. They're going to have to account for this. But I do think this is in some ways the best thing that could have happened. And the fact that it happened in time to replace him. And Joe, I have to say, one person we're not going to see on the ballot is McDreamy. Patrick Dempsey wrote an op-ed. He's not running, but he is going to look to see who the candidate's going to be. But there are a lot of viable candidates out there, and a lot of progressives who can, without all the baggage, who have the same issues on their side that Platner was running on. He is not the only progressive out there.
Well, and some of whom have been vetted and were in the gubernatorial campaign. Nirav Shah is getting a lot of talk, former Maine CDC chief, as well as the state secretary of state, Shanna Bellows. We'll see about that, obviously. But these could be somewhat familiar names, certainly on the convention level. We'll see, I guess, on a statewide level. Rick, I want to dive back into this video that Graham Platner made, because he said a lot in 11 minutes, and it got a little conspiratorial at times. You could sort of feel the cosmic irony that this man is sensing as he sits out there on the deck in Maine, steps from the oyster farm. Listen to how he put this sort of media political party conspiracy together in what he sees as a war against him. Listen.
We live in a political system that is not built for normal people. It is a system that is built structurally to make sure that movements like ours cannot flourish. That if they begin to succeed, they can be crushed. But now the ball is in the court of the Democratic establishment. My name might be on the ballot right now, but that ballot line belongs to the people of Maine. And on November 3rd, it needs to belong to the people of Maine. And the next Democratic senator for Maine needs to belong to the people of Maine. They need to reflect the will and the values of the people of this state.
Now, beyond making you think that you don't want to be around this man when he's angry, Rick, a lot of people believe what he said. Even take Graham Platner's name out of it and this campaign, believe that about American politics. And as somebody who has taken so-called normal people, albeit many exceptional ones, as a campaign manager and molded them into a candidate and started a career in politics, I just wonder how you respond to that.
Yeah, look, this is the politics that we live in today, not the politics that I grew up in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. And you could close your eyes, and as David Axelrod said today, Graham Platner took his script from Donald Trump. I mean, this is the same kind of rhetoric that Donald Trump used when he first ran for the Republican nomination, right? Oh, these Republicans, the establishment's against me. We're going to have to rip this out of their hands. And literally, if you'd close your eyes and change the voice, it just very well could have been the same person, not taking responsibility for any of their own shortfalls, not taking any responsibility for anything they'd done wrong in the process. And so, look, I mean, this is the script. And every time Democrats criticize Donald Trump for, this kind of lack of accountability, all they got to do is look in the mirror and see Graham Platner staring right back at them. And so until we have an agreement that somehow none of this actually is good for politics or good for the people who practice politics, then I think we're going to just see more of this kind of junk. I mean, the last thing we needed to do is have to watch that video, listen to him not take responsibility, and count how many cars went by while he was given that thing. Because it's the worst produced thing I've ever seen in my life. I would only wish
directing
that there were
this?
Sirens, come pick him up.
Oh man, it happens to the best of us.
Happens to the best of us.
Jeanne, he suspended his campaign. That used to be something that you did when you were thinking about dropping out of the race, which I thought the first video was. Remember, he was going to stop down and think about things. Now he's suspending the campaign. Everybody, including me, says, well, he's out of the race. Should we assume that? I mean, is he waiting for some sort of window to come back?
He can wait. The New York Times poll just before he dropped showed, this was before these allegations came out, showed that he was losing to Susan Collins. And I am going to just remind everybody that Republicans let Donald Trump become president and run 3 times on their ticket. And they have nominated Ken Paxton to be their senator from Texas. The difference is Democrats have pushed out this Platner, have pushed out Platner. But the other thing, Joe, is I think we need to get over this moment where if you are working class, if you are somebody who has never run for office before, you have somehow committed these atrocities against women, you have made anti-Semitic statements, and we're supposed to look away. There are a lot of wonderfully successful, progressive, populist people out there who have not been accused of these kind of really credible and horrific crimes. So the idea we have to take one with the other is laughable. And that shows that these consultants who went there did not do their job, and the Democratic Party did not do it until now that they got him out.
Boy, really something. Just quickly, Rick, as a campaign operative, what happens to the folks who are running Graham Platner's campaign, may have not shared information or were responsible for this dumpster fire that we have here? Do they get jobs in the next cycle? How does this work?
Yeah, first of all, on suspending the campaign, it's a legal framework. It allows him to continue to spend money and take it in to pay the bills that he owes. So that's just a nomenclature. Yeah, it's going to be very hard for these guys the way this went down. That video is going to basically tattoo unemployable on their forehead in politics.
Wow, jeez. All right, speaking of tattoos, pun intended, I'd say we put this one to bed. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino will help us figure out, though, how we're going to get through this convention and figure out what this race is going to be. I feel like we need to get up to Maine, everybody. Producer James is going to set up the bandwagon. Maybe we'll be on the way. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, Bloomberg Politics contributors, thank you on this day after Platner suspends the campaign. We're going to turn back to the news from the White House and from Iran with a second straight day of trading fire in an MOU that is still up in the air. We have not heard from the president today, but we have heard from CENTCOM, and we're going to get an update coming up on all of this stuff and spend some time with Emily Harding at CSIS. We'll also get to Wall Street. We may as well do that right now. Charlie Pellet is standing by at World Headquarters in New York. Feels a little better than this time yesterday, Charlie. What do you have?
Absolutely right. We got two central themes today. Semiconductors, as in the SOX, the Philadelphia Stock Exchange Semiconductor Stock Index, up 4.6%. Also a retreat for crude oil. Right now, West Texas Intermediate crude at $71.56 a barrel. It is down now by 2.6%. Bottom line here, S&P 500 index up 60, up by about 0.8%. You run the GIP screen on the Bloomberg, and you can see that we are just about the best level of the day on the S&P. Dow Industrials up 190, up by about 0.4%. NASDAQ up 305, up 1.2%. But the NASDAQ 100 index full of big tech names up 1.7%. Again, the SOX up 4.7%. The VIX just above 16 with a 10-year 4.53% and the 2-year 4.15%. Gold is up 1.4%, $41.33 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude, $71.63 a barrel. WTI now down by 2.6%. Earnings news, PepsiCo said consumers pulled back in the second quarter, slowing its efforts to revitalize its North American snack business. Today, looking at shares of PepsiCo, they are selling off. Right now, we do have PepsiCo shares declining. Also declining today, rival Coca-Cola. Coke, by the way, down 0.8%. PepsiCo right now down by 3.1%. Also after earnings, we're seeing Levi Strauss shares up now by 1.5%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcast. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That Joe Mathieu is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Okay, Charlie, many thanks. He'll be back coming up at the top of the hour, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, as we kick off Bloomberg Business Week Daily with more on Wall Street. Humbling feeling if you sold your Micron yesterday. As soon as you think you've got this figured out, it turns around. Indeed, the memory stocks, the chip stocks are in many cases surging today. Micron specifically up almost 8% now, $75 a share to leap back above $1,000 after everyone had left it on the side of the road, said to be cyclical, up too far too fast. Then, of course, you wake up, it's a new day. NVIDIA is having a little bit of trouble, but we're seeing gains in Intel, in Broadcom. And we want to dig a little bit deeper with Nora Melinda, of course, covers the markets for us, our markets correspondent, live from World Headquarters in New York. Nora, this rotation is getting to be manic. I'm getting whiplash. How about you?
You and me both. I mean, I am dizzy, as I was just saying yesterday. Yet a new day. And as you mentioned, Micron is really on the mind of a lot of investors. It's a great day to be an investor of Micron because we are seeing it's the biggest point contributor to the S&P 500 gains today. And this is coming after some news that we saw, essentially that it's going to be raising its spending on new U.S. plants to $250 billion. Now, that's up from $200 billion before. And of course, we know that this is kind of to feed the memory demand. All the attention's really been on memory right now, and that's where you're seeing Micron stepping up to the plate. Also, the reporting showing that this should create more than 90,000 jobs. So you're certainly seeing Wall Street celebrating as they're seeing Micron really looking toward how they can fit into this puzzle in terms of satisfying, I should say, the demand that we're seeing for memory.
Nothing major really came out of the headlines from Iran overnight, at least market-moving headlines, Nora. So people seem to be feeling a little more relaxed today. You've got a VIX of 16. Oil prices are rolling back, despite the fact that we were still shooting there, 90 targets last evening. But I'm wondering what the next catalyst is, if nothing more than earnings. This is next week already. I mean, it's time to go again, right?
That's the thing. I think the market's looking ahead to earnings. We've also got CPI data just coming up here shortly. But you are seeing the market today looking past the headlines that we're seeing in the Middle East. And we're seeing a risk-on mood in the market. If you take a look at the NASDAQ 100, it's up about 1.7%. And so we are seeing it sitting near some of those session highs as we're really seeing some risk appetite here percolating in the market. As you mentioned, oil, looking at Brent crude, it is pairing some of its earlier gains that we saw recently, and it is here in the red. So investors are just trying to figure out what the next trade is. Of course, we're going to see fundamentally when we look at the economy and some of the economic data that we have ahead, but really earnings is what the market is looking for as to whether or not corporate America still remains healthy in this environment.
Okay, Nora, thank you so much. It's great to see you. Nora Melinda live in New York, watching Wall Street for us here on Balance of Power. It's the Thursday edition, and we're still following the bead in Iran after another night of back and forth. This was the second straight night of attacks by the U.S. as promised by the president. And while we've not heard from Donald Trump today, U.S. Central Command on social media saying forces completed another round of strikes with 90 targets this time: air defense systems, coastal surveillance assets, missile and drone storage sites, and saying that U.S. forces remain vigilant, lethal, and prepared suggests there may be more where this came from. The president has repeatedly been presented with military options, and we know that fire is coming back in the other direction, not necessarily at the U.S. Armada that has been lined up near the Strait. The IRGC struck U.S. bases in Kuwait and Bahrain, repeating a pattern that we have seen, striking our allies in the region that are home to U.S. assets. And we want to hear more about this and maybe get a better idea of where we stand, where this MOU is, where the ceasefire stands, with Emily Harding, Vice President of the Defense and Security Department at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, and a real expert as we watch her resume as former director for Iran and the National Security Council, former deputy staff director on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. Emily, it's been a long time, and we're glad to have you back. Welcome to Bloomberg TV and radio. Are you assuming the ceasefire is over, or that we're simply continuing this pattern of tit for tats against the backdrop of some form of talks?
I don't think it's really over. I think this is definitely another example of war being a continuation of policy by other means. Basically, both sides are communicating with violence at the moment. What we see is the Iranians expressing their displeasure at several triggers that have happened recently, including Israeli strikes inside Lebanon, some clashes with the Kurds in the north of Iran, and then also this transit of ships close to the Omani side of the border. And we just saw them wrap up funeral festivities for the Ayatollah, and that's a moment where they seem to really have wanted to reassert themselves in the Strait. And then we see the Trump administration pushing back very hard with retaliatory strikes. So we are in one of these cycles, but that doesn't mean that we can't return to negotiations, return to a ceasefire when both sides have, in effect, said their piece.
Well, Emily, the U.S. attacked Iran's coastal southern provinces, and according to Iran, this is not from CENTCOM, 2 bridges in eastern provinces along the railway line to the city of Mashhad. Iran calling the attacks, this is a statement from the Foreign Ministry, I'm sure you've seen it, a flagrant violation of Articles 1 and 5 of the MOU. For starters, what are we doing dropping bridges here? That seems like an escalation. And what do you make of a flagrant violation? Does it still stand?
I think both sides could shoot some talking points back and forth on who's violating the MOU more, but that's really not a productive conversation at this point. On the point of the bridges, though, I think there's some conflicting opinions about that. From a military perspective, you could say that those bridges were very useful militarily to move things around inside Iran that are necessary to keep harassing the Strait. On the other hand, it's also civilian infrastructure, and civilians need to get around. So this is one of those things where inside the Department of War, there would have been a lot of debate. Inside CENTCOM, there would have been a lot of debate over whether these were legitimate military targets. We're also pretty deep into this conflict at this point, and while we started it with a huge target deck, those have kind of worn down a little bit. So now what we're looking for is smaller targets, small fast boats, and things that are really going to send a message. And to me, those strikes on bridges and infrastructure really says to the Iranians that, look, we can bring some serious pain to your administration, and we're going to be in this to win this.
Wow. I wonder, and I've asked a few people this, when you hear a couple nights in a row, hey, we just struck 90 more targets, we're taking the fight to Iran, having heard repeatedly from the president that we have defeated Iran militarily, we've destroyed their Air Force and Navy. How can we continue to find so many new targets? Are they rebuilding, reconstituting sites, or are these lower level, lower grade targets that might not have been prioritized earlier in the war?
Right. So there are big strategic targets like the facilities where they're working on nuclear weapons production, where they're working on nuclear enrichment. Those things have been thoroughly destroyed. When you look at smaller targets like these, however, it is pretty easy to rebuild some of it. A lot of what they're doing in the Strait is they're harassing shipping with small drones. Those are very easy to hide, very easy to produce, and very easy to move around the country. So those are going to be the kind of mobile targets they're looking for now. We've also seen them try to harass shipping in the Strait with small boats, small fast boats. Those can be hidden in any number of places all along the Iranian coast, and they can keep moving that material into position. So while we are continually knocking down a lot of these targets, some of them are going to come back on. Others are going to be like deeper into the target deck, or these things that we didn't strike before that now we're going to send a message by striking.
Got it. As I mentioned, you were director for Iran on the National Security Council 0708, so the George W. Bush administration. Emily, to what extent were you talking about this very issue, to the extent to which you gamed out having to protect the Strait or maybe occupying Karg Island? Are the stories and targets you're reading about now familiar to you? I realize you can't describe classified information, but were these considerations that long ago?
Quite familiar. In a lot of ways, this is a war that we've been planning for, waiting for 20 years. Back when I was on the National Security Council, we were seeing the Iranian government go after our troops in Iraq in a very aggressive way. And so we were planning for a potential escalation that could lead to this kind of war. We did the war games, we did the planning, we did the op plans. This has been something that the Pentagon has been ready to do for a very long time. And granted, they've been updating those plans based on what would be the most legitimate targets, the most painful targets for the Iranian regime. But one of the features of all of those discussions was always, how are they going to try to close the Strait? Will they be able to shut down global shipping? What can we do about it if they do? This particular round of conflict, I was surprised by how little preparation there was for that eventuality, that they were going to close the Strait. It just seemed like an obvious move that they were always going to try to make. And I think what has really surprised the world is just how little effort it really takes on the part of the Iranians to make it unpalatable for things like global shipping to move through that very narrow waterway.
This is fascinating. That's, of course, when the commander-in-chief was calling Iran part of the axis of evil. We all remember that speech. Emily, what do you make outside of maybe lack of planning for the Strait, the rest of the way the military has selected targets and comported itself over the past couple of months? Is this similar to what your administration would have done in terms of approach?
Oh, I think so. I mean, it's really a tale of two policies. There's one policy, which is the military execution of the president's orders. And in so many ways, that has been amazingly, perfectly, wonderfully done. From rescuing the downed airman who was in Iran to the very precise targeting to minimizing civilian casualties whenever possible, to being able to find, fix, and finish very quickly with the help of some new technologies. A lot of that has been proving the way of American warfare works very well, very efficiently, and can be lethal when it needs to be. On the other hand, though, you have the overarching policy of the conflict. You know, what are we really trying to accomplish here? There are things that you can accomplish via military means, and there are things that you just can't. So early on in this year, what we saw was the Trump administration come out and say that they were looking for things like an end to violence against protesters. They were talking about things like regime change or a new regime in Iran. And then they kind of backed off that rhetoric. And I suspect it's because somebody explained to them that these objectives are very difficult to achieve through military means. Instead, we shifted to this framework where we were looking at nuclear and Navy, and those things you can accomplish.
Now he's calling it the denuclearization is the word we've been hearing from the president. Emily, really great to have you back. Don't be a stranger. Emily Harding, CSIS. It was a clinic on what's happening overseas as we wait for more hard information from the administration. I'll see you on the late edition of Balance of Power.